Hey guys, it's Courtney, and I am back with another clean and simple card using the Simon Says Stamp August 2018 card kit. I'm starting off here with a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I started by stamping my image in the lower right-hand corner with Fog ink by Simon Says Stamp. This is a very light ink. I started with my first image because that's the one that I'm going to color. Then I kind of flipped the stamp around each time and filled in the rest of the panel. Now for the coloring, this is a very, very light ink, so this ends up giving it a no line coloring look, which I'm still kind of new at. I have not mastered that for sure yet. But I'm starting off with my lightest color, which is a pretty light color, my R00, and I'm mapping out where my shadows and where my darkest areas will be. Primarily because if I make a mistake, I can easily cover it up later. These are really tiny petals. There's a ton of them and they're really tiny. You could get away with just 2 colors here, but I am using 3. Now, when you're doing the no line coloring here, or somewhat no line coloring, you want to make sure that you try to avoid putting 2 shadows right directly next to each other, or else you're going to lose the shape of that petal. So because the lines of the stamp and the fog ink are going to pretty much disappear once you're done coloring, you want to kind of go along with those lines, avoiding putting 2 shadows right directly next to each other, or else it's going to look like one large petal rather than maybe 2 or 3 small ones. Next, I'm going in with my darkest color, which is an R22, and basically just almost tracing the lines. I'm not really extending them out. I'm not using any kind of flicking. There's honestly not much room to do that. So I'm just pretty much outlining the stamp itself. There are some areas that I might create a little bit thicker of a line if it is a larger petal. And maybe there are a few petals that I avoid using the darkest color altogether, just to give it a little bit more dimension in the end. Next, I'll move on to my mid-tone color, which is an R20, and pretty much just go over those same lines, just making them a little bit thicker. The larger petals on the edges, I might flick out just a little bit, but I am leaving the edge of each petal white because we will fill that in with our highlight color. Now the petals that I did not use the darkest color on, this is where I will create my shadow with my mid-tone. And this will give it the illusion that the flower has all different depths within it. For this little bud on the side, you really probably only need 2 colors on these because the petals on this one are even smaller. So there wasn't much of a highlight. I wasn't able to leave much of a highlight on that little bud. Last, I'll go in with my lightest color and pretty much just fill in the entire thing, blending those colors out and filling in the edge of the petals. Next, for my leaves, I'll be using 3 G markers. And again, going in with my lightest color. Now, for the leaves, the darkest area is going to be where they're coming out of that stem. If you take a look at the image, it looks like they're kind of indented, and there's little parts of the leaf that kind of fold over on itself. So these would be the darkest areas. My darkest color is my G46, and I'm just going to go over those darkest areas with that and barely touching the paper for that shadow where the leaf is folded over on itself. You want to barely touch the paper, especially if you're using such a dark color. And I'll extend those little veins within the leaf as well. For my mid-tone, I'll just extend those areas out almost to the edge. The part of the leaf that's actually folded over, I'm going to leave for just strictly my highlight. The more of a contrast you use as far as your colors are concerned, the more those veins that you kind of colored in or went over are going to pop. So if you use colors that are very close to one another, you're going to lose those lines that you had colored in. And next, for my little planter here, I'm going to use my warm gray markers, and I'm gonna go over the entire thing just to get my paper saturated a little bit. And then I'll move on to my darkest color. Now the darkest color that I'm using here is a W7, which is nearly black. It's a very, very dark color. So I'm just barely touching the paper where this leaf is hanging over the planter. This will create a shadow. And then on either side, I'm just doing very, very small flicks. I want this object to appear round, so my highlight will be in the center. For your darkest color, when you're coloring something like this, it helps to kind of draw that line and then extend the little flicks from there. That way you don't go too much out of the line of the image itself. Next, I'll move on to my darkest mid-tone color, which is my W5, and I'll just extend those flicks a little bit longer. Now, the shadow that is being created from that leaf that's hanging over, those flicks are going to be shorter because I want my highlight to be consistently in the middle of this little planter. I need to make sure that those flicks are shorter than on the bottom of the planter, so they all match in the end. Next, I moved on to my W1 and then, or my W3 rather, and then I'll move back into my W1 and just fill in that entire area. After I was done coloring and done recording, I realized that those little lines within the planter I lost. So I'm just taking my white gel pen here and cleaning up any areas that might not be completely straight. And like I said, after the recording, I did add those lines back in with my white gel pen. So once the coloring was all done, we will move on to the sentiment. I'm using 2 of the smaller sentiments from that same stamp set, and I'll be using a piece of slate cardstock, also by Simon Says Stamp. And this is a scrap that we had from a card a couple of days ago. And I'm using my anti-static tool here, and I'll be stamping in Versamark ink and using Hero Arts white embossing powder to go ahead and heat set my sentiment. I'm separating these sentiments because they will, once I cut them down, they will be 2 separate strips. Once my sentiment was heat set, I took my paper trimmer and I tried to line these up as best as I could to make it kind of easy to make sure the strips are the same exact size. I just used my paper trimmer and created 2 small strips, and I'll layer these on top of one another on my card panel using Scotch foam tape. Last, I took a Nuvo glitter gloss pen and just added a little bit of sparkle to both the large flower and the little bud. I adhered this entire panel onto an A2 size card base, and that was it. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I hope you come back tomorrow for day number 5. Have a great day.